The first three speakers have introduced this word of civil servants, either national or international. It's my pleasure to pass the floor to the representative of academia, namely Professor Roman Petrov, who represents Ukrainian Academy of Science. It's Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. And in his presentation, I think he will try to answer a very rhetoric question whether the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement indeed is a road to the EU membership.
Thank you very much. Despite being an academic, I will try to be as brief as possible and leave more time for discussion. And I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Moravska for inviting me regularly to these highly interesting and important meetings. And again, started my presentation, I would like to say that indeed the topic of the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement has become a kind of a never-ending saga. Just an illustration for you. When I firstly started my negotiations with Professor Moravska on the topic of my presentation, in November it was titled, "Will the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement be signed in Vilnius?" The second topic was, why didn't the Ukrainian government sign the agreement? Then the next topic, actually, what we moved to, it was the association agreement, a road to the EU membership. And I thought, actually, that today the topic could have changed again due to yesterday developments in Brussels, in Luxembourg, when the European Court of Justice ruled on the EU-Philippines free trade area agreement, which might legally inhibit the immediate signature of the economic part of the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement. But let's keep our fingers crossed and let's hope that these legal, technical difficulties will be solved as soon as possible. So it's never-ending saga, and not only in Europe, but in Ukraine, people are not sure yet whether finally this agreement will be fully signed, not partially. Again, moving to the agreement, just to highlight certain important points in the shape of thesis bullet points. This agreement is highly revolutionary, not only for Ukraine, but for the EU legal system. It's certainly a new generation of association agreements between the EU and third countries. It's a huge agreement, never been experienced by the EU before. Over 1,000 about 1,000 pages, about 500 articles, dozens of annexes with a comprehensive list of the EU acquis to be adopted by Ukraine. Cross-pillar, all pillars are being covered. So it's a massive agreement, and it's a kind of a prototype for a new generation of association agreements. As you all know, same type, twin agreements, almost twin agreements will be signed hopefully soon with Moldova and Georgia. So certainly it's a new stage in the field of, in the domain of the EU external relations. Of course, this agreement will and already bears so many challenges for the EU and for Ukraine. Since this agreement is there are three key points which characterize this agreement. Comprehensive, complex, and lots of conditionality. And conditionality is very important. It's everywhere, and there is a new type of conditionality called market conditionality. It means it will be employed for the very first time by the EU, which means once Ukraine diverts from the course of political, democratic, and market reforms, the opening of the market could be stopped. So it's very interesting feature of the agreement, and certainly would be interesting to see how it's going to work. For Ukraine, there are plenty of challenges, especially since I'm a lawyer, I might tell about challenges for the Ukrainian legal system. We will certainly have to consider how this agreement, what place it will occupy within the legal system of Ukraine. We have a little bit of problem with our constitution. The most visible problem is the issue of the Rome statute, so-called statute which obliges Ukraine to accede to the statute of the International Criminal Court. There was a ruling of the Constitutional Court saying no, it's actually not in line with the Constitution. So now, after our parliament decided to accede to the statute, the Constitutional Court has to rule, and to rule not only on the statute, but on this agreement too, which obliges us to follow this provision, this commitment. There is a big question about how these binding decisions of the Association Council will be perceived by the within the legal system of Ukraine. It's certainly a new novel development for us. We have never experienced implementing binding decisions of international structure as this Association Council is going to be. Then challenge of adopting vast scope of the EU acquis. Hundreds of EU directives must be adopted, implemented, without actually being part of the Ukrainian legal system. It's going to be sort of implemented through our national laws. And of course, issue of monitoring, how the EU is going to monitor, because of course it's one thing to just adopt, implement, to sign the agreement, but we all understand without effective implementation it will never work properly. So it's going to be a very important issue for us. And so let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that the agreement is going to be signed. With regard to the issue of the EU membership, again, of course, we all understand there is a political dimension of this issue, but from the legal point of view, I would say that the agreement itself does not differ, even exceeds in some extent the generation of so-called Europe agreements, which were signed between the EC at that time and countries of the Central and Eastern Europe, including Latvia. And as we all understand now, these agreements played a crucial role on the road of the membership, and I don't see any legal obstacle why the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement couldn't play the same role, especially taking into account that the legal base of the agreement is special. It does not include Article 8 of the TEU, Treaty on the European Union. Why? Because Article 8 is called Relations between the EU and neighborhood countries. And this article explicitly says no membership, only privileged relationships. And it's a big puzzle for lawyers. Why? Actually, this article is not one of the legal bases of this agreement, and there is a hope that probably it's a hint that actually this agreement is not the end road and could be used for further enlargement activities, accession activities. But it's just a speculation right now, but it's an interesting fact. Well, coming back to some few words about the current crisis in Ukraine with relation to the Eastern Partnership and the agreement, I just would like to highlight several points related to this situation. First, unfortunately, we must acknowledge the information campaign has been dramatically lost by the EU with regard to the agreement. Why? Just an illustration. I cannot understand, as a lawyer again, but why this agreement had been kept secret and confidential until the very last moment. I vividly remember just a year ago, in July last year, sitting at one of the conferences, Jean Monnet conferences, having on my side representative of a foreign office of one of the member states who was actually hiding the text of the agreement from me. Because, as he explained, I was not entitled to look at it. But I immediately showed him the same text available online. But it just shows that on both sides, on the Ukrainian side, there was no access to the agreement and no information campaign. And on the EU side, due to some extent, we we were kept sort of distant from the text. There was no information campaign, and unfortunately, many people who went to Maidan in December, under slogans of the association agreement, they hadn't read the text, and they associated the text of the agreement with the perspective of the membership, just to explain you the background. So, and part of the reasons and problems what we experience now in the east of Ukraine is because people just they're not aware about what this agreement might give to Ukraine, might not. So there is a not complete but quite a significant information vacuum. Then about sanctions and crisis management, it must be acknowledged, again, it's my personal view, that the EU as a umbrella of the Eastern Partnership and party of the agreement is not actively engaged into the crisis management. Unfortunately, what we see, major crisis management activities are being held on a phone call regime between President of the Russian Federation, President of the US, and one or two heads of the European states, one or two, not more, and we don't see very much active engagement of the high representative on foreign and security affairs into this issue. Sanctions, of course there is a big debate among academics whether these sanctions against Russia are effective. It's a big debate, but there was a slogan for clever sanctions, and of course it's very interesting and probably could be applied. In this regard, I cannot understand why there is no new vision for the future development of the EU-Russia relations. Certainly, a document similar to the documents which were used in the past, common strategies or action plans vis-à-vis Russia could be of a great help, especially taking into consideration that a new integration competitive bloc just has been built east of the Eastern Partnership countries, I mean the Eurasian Union. So what is a logical question, what is the strategy of the EU towards the Eurasian Union? No one knows. And certainly maybe some of the keys of solving the crisis today in Ukraine could be in understanding this future strategy, how actually the EU is going to build own relations with this new competitive integration bloc. It's very important. And the last point about the nature of the Eastern Partnership itself, well, of course, some speakers said today that it was a quite successful policy, and I may agree. However, taking into account ambitious objectives of the association agreement, it must be understood that the Eastern Partnership countries now hope for something more and more ambitious and more far-reaching. And maybe it's a time for the revision and for a new policy which would respond to recent challenges and expectations in the region. Thank you very much.